Catherine Beer, the Liberal Democrat MEP for the South East. You've been to see some of your constituents that are suffering from the effects of high water levels and flooding. What kind of circumstances are your constituents living in?
It's just awful. They're not flooded out of their houses, but they're just having to contend with raw sewage in their gardens. I mean, a whole street, back and front gardens. The manholes in the streets are just bubbling up. Somebody empties a bath or flushes a toilet, it's just coming back up again. And they're having to contend with it. They're having to live in their own house like that. It's not enough to force them out of their houses. But the street smells, they're having trouble contacting their insurance companies. They're overwhelmed. And there is no prospect of this going away in the near future because the river levels are so high that there's no drop for this water to go away to.
I mean, who do you blame for circumstances like that? And what do you make of the fact that people are having to live in those kind of situations?
Oh, where do you start with the blame? We can blame the climate change, which we've been knowing has happened, is going to bring these huge events. So we've had a whole series of storms. So the water table is now so high, the rivers are at capacity, and any time the water goes. But we have old infrastructure. The storm drains are supposed to take storm water, but they're taking sewage when that's backing up. And so the whole infrastructure is at creaking point. We need money in there to actually do the preventative work, increase the capacity of the rivers, maybe widen, increase some of the floodplains further upstream, and then we need people on the ground to help these people in day to day. I mean, it's been going on for weeks now, and there's no prospect of it going away. And the dogs are sick, children are getting sick too. It's an awful, awful situation to have to live in.
And I'll ask you later on about the longer term, because I guess it kind of impinges on that as well. But in the shorter term, from Europe, is there anything that the European Union can help in your view? You've given a speech this morning in the European Parliament urging the government once again to bid for this funding.
I cannot understand why they won't even put their hand up and say, we are considering claiming. That triggers the claim. Okay, and we have 10 weeks and we're getting very perilously close to the end of the 10 weeks. They don't actually have to take the money in the end if they find that they can manage without it. So then they can say, no, we withdraw our claim. But if you don't claim in those 10 weeks, you've lost it. So why on earth they're not claiming? I mean, I was informed by a tweet to say that no, the government wasn't. We've written to the minister, then we heard who said no, then David Cameron said yes, and now I have this tweet to say no, that they're not going to claim. I think that's very shoddy. I think it's very hard on the people who are having to struggle day by day with this. Their businesses are shut, we've flooded out their home insurance, and what is going to happen in the future. If we don't get that money to cope with the problems now, to build and strengthen our flood defences, then how are they going to get insurance for their houses and businesses in the future? So it's a whole knock-on, and just for the want of, I'm beginning to think it's just Euroscepticism in the government. They're just terrified to have a good news story coming out of Europe, and it's my constituencies that's suffering.
How do you think it leaves your constituents feeling when they're hearing these mixed messages? You mentioned about David Cameron, hints that David Cameron was going to put in a bid. Then you mentioned the tweet you've got saying, no, there isn't going to be any money, any bid for money from Europe. How do you think it leaves the people that are on the ground with sewage in their living room and so forth?
They're feeling very angry. When I tell them that there is money there in Europe that we can claim to help their situation, help the local councils, help the water people, help the railways and all the infrastructure that's been damaged, they're very angry, and rightly so. And I think we need to be pushing the government. That's why I've started a petition on my website. We've got over 1,000 now, the Lib Dems petition, I just can't understand why the government is being so reluctant to claim. It's there. It's an insurance policy that we've all paid in for. Now let's have some money back to help us fight these awful, awful floods.
You mentioned that you've raised it here in the Parliament, and you mentioned that you've got this petition underway. Do you think that if political pressure from you politicians isn't going to make a difference, that the petition from members of the public might do?
Well, it all helps. It's all tools in our armour. I mean, I'm talking to local councils and councillors as well, and they're saying, well, why not? We can claim for this on a regional basis. If the government doesn't want to trigger a national claim, you can do it by region. And once they find out about it, they're very angry that the government is not claiming it.
And even for a kind of regional claim, they still would need the government to kind of put in the bid, because the government is, in EU parlance, the member state, the government that the EU has to deal with. So those local councils need to also be convincing the government if they want the funding put in. Is that how it works?
Yeah, well, yes, they do indeed. They can actually get together and do a regional claim, but it has to be backed up by the member state government. So yes, they have to convince them that they have a legitimate claim. But we're running out of time. We're really up against it. It's difficult because these storms came in wave after wave after wave. So, but the first storm was on Christmas. That's when the clock starts ticking. Down in Hampshire, where the railway line has had a huge landslip down there, they're having to struggle to open up the line at Botley. They tell us that this sort of work would take 3 or 4 years of planning and working. They're having to do it as an emergency work. That is crazy. You know, they need every penny of help that they can get, and the money's there to help.
A word then about the longer term. How do you think we should be dealing with these kind of situations in future? And again, is there anything Europe can do to help with that?
Yes, there is long-term funding. This is not the emergency solidarity fund. This is structural funds that are designed to build flood defences, environmental protection, those sorts of things. We can apply for. You have to have match funding, so that's complicated from DEFRA's point of view, but the local councils can apply for that. Flood defences on the coast, all that sort of looking upstream, reclaiming floodplains and having the rivers better managed. In Oxford, there is a plan already drawn up to have, I think it's called the Western Gully, to take excess water out of the Thames and the other rivers that come into Oxford. The plans are there. We could actually apply for European funding to help pay for that. We're going to have more and more of these storms. We know that. We know the climate is changing. And so we are going to have to step up our preparedness for what is going to be thrown at us from the skies in the future.